On a stifling late summer Saturday, the sprawling weekend market at the edge of town felt alive in a way that prickled the skin, a tangle of faded tarps, rickety wooden tables, and the hushed buzz of neighbors trading bargains and gossip. Under canopies heavy with heat, a woman emerged at the far end of the lane. She wore a deep olive green silk dress, its high collar and long sleeves concealing every inch of skin, yet flowing with a grace that made the day itself seem to pause. Her hair was pinned neatly, and her face carried the calm confidence of someone accustomed to being watched, though she offered not a single greeting as she glided past stalls piled high with hand-stitched quilts, brass figurines, and jars of home-canned preserves. Shoppers murmured in low tones as she passed, leaning in to trade speculation. Where had she come from? What secret did her silence hide? The afternoon sun slanted through gaps in the canvas roof, casting long shadows that flickered like silent witnesses. Beneath each step, the cracked cement tiles gave a faint, uneven crack, an echo of the market's worn history, yet no leaf blower or radio call could distract from the hush that settled around her. Without a word, she moved close enough to the old bookstall that its wooden boards creaked under her passing. An elderly vendor called out the title of a rare 1946 novel. She tilted her head, allowed a faint, courteous smile, then walked on, leaving him blinking in confusion. It wasn't fear that made the crowd recoil. It was curiosity mingled with the unease of something unfamiliar in a place where everyone thought they belonged. Parents drew children in closer. Teenagers nudged each other, phones half raised as if to capture a ghost. Yet nobody dared break the spell. In that moment, the market was no longer just a weekend ritual. It had become a silent stage, and she, the lone actress, holding her part with a quiet power that made every onlooker hold their breath. Stopping at the weathered town map nailed to a sun-bleached post, she leans in as if reading each faded line. The market's usual murmur falls away until a rasping voice cuts through the stillness. A fruit vendor in a threadbare shirt, his hands sticky with syrupy banana sap, cranes forward and calls, "What are you hiding under that silk dress?" The words land like a stone dropped into glass. Stallholders freeze and mid-sale bartering voices vanish, and even the slow hum of a distant generator seems to waver. She straightens, not in panic but in deliberate resolve, and turns her head just enough for them to see there will be no answer. Her silence isn't submission, it's a challenge. Laughter flickers in the periphery. Two teenagers by the clothing rack exchange a quick, nervous grin. But it's hollow, as though the very act of witnessing has transformed a joke into something raw and jagged. Mothers pull their children in closer, not to protect them from danger, but from the shame of inaction. The elder vendor who dared speak finds his throat tight, his echo awkward in the sudden hush. In that pregnant pause, the market is no longer a backdrop for casual commerce. It's a stage for power, unspoken, weighty, and intense. Her unblinking calm dares every onlooker to reconsider the right to leer or jest. What was meant as a throwaway taunt has become the knife at their throat. Will they laugh, or will they learn? In the echo of her quiet defiance, the crowd realizes that mocking another human being, especially in uniform presumption, may no longer feel so harmless. Without warning, the sharp click of heavy boots cut through the hush. Two officers appeared at the market's mouth, strides measured and unhurried like predators closing in. The taller one, broad-shouldered, sunglasses still in place despite the glaring sun, stepped directly in front of her. From his holster, he lifted a badge, though no one had asked to see it. With a deliberate smoothness, he reached out and pressed a fingertip against the hem of her silk dress, as if conducting some perfunctory security check. She did not flinch. Her posture remained unyielding, shoulders, level head, held high. The second officer, younger and leaner, hovered at her back, radio crackling faintly as though waiting for permission to pounce. Around them, the market's usual tapestry unraveled. Stallholders backed away, crates of tomatoes teetered, and the elderly man who had dared insult her now swallowed hard words caught in his throat. Not a single voice rose to challenge this display of authority. The air itself seemed to weigh heavier, the scent of warm spices and fresh jam replaced by the metallic tang of unspoken fear. Shoppers parted like reeds in a stream, eyes wide but silent. Children held their mothers' skirts and peered from behind barrels of honey, unsure if this was punishment or performance. In that moment, power wore a uniform, and wore it openly. A badge leaned not just on duty, but on dominance. Yet it was her stillness, unbroken and calm, that shook the ground beneath them. The faint ripple of her gaze, steady and unblinking, carried the force of a gale, exposing the raw dependence of authority on compliance. And so the scene hung suspended officers in control, yet held hostage by a single silent figure who refused to give them the spectacle that they craved. In her unyielding quiet, the true embodiment of power revealed itself not in the reach of a uniformed hand, but in the stillness that dared to say, "You have no right." Without warning, she slipped her hand along the seam of her silk dress and withdrew a slim leather wallet. With deliberate calm, she opened it and produced a crisp identification card, name, photograph, and credentials facing the officers as if the simple act needed no justification. The taller officer's fingertips, still brushing the hem of her gown, froze in midair. His mirrored sunglasses couldn't hide the shock in his eyes. The younger officer, half his size, shrank back against the canvas wall, gaze fixed on the ground, as if the very sight of her standing her ground was too much to bear. Around them, the marketplace fell silent. Stallholders and shoppers alike froze in place, trading the usual clatter of commerce for the soft whistle of wind threading through the tarps above. A child clutching cotton candy paused mid-bite. The fruit vendor's knife hovered over ripe mangoes. Honor watched as her single gesture did more to command respect than any uniform. She did not flinch, did not speak, did not step away. She remained a living statue in the center of a brazen display. Her ID card glinted under the fading sunlight, an unspoken verdict that demolished every unfounded assumption and laid bare the raw dependence of authority on compliance. In that taut stillness, the tall officer's hand finally retreated, an admission louder than any apology. The younger man exhaled, shoulders slumping, as if the breath he'd been holding had been stolen all along. The crowd, once complicit in its hushed curiosity, began to stir heads, shaking eyes, widening with the realization that no badge grants license to violate another's dignity. Without a word, she closed her wallet, let it slip back into the hidden pocket of her silk dress, and turned on quiet, steady feet. As she walked away, the marketplace exhaled too, an unspoken reckoning, born not of force, but of a single woman's refusal to be silenced. A distant siren wailed like a warning, growing louder, until a patrol car rolled to a stop at the edge of the market. The tall officer stepped forward, badge gleaming against his chest as if he'd plucked the sun from the sky. He spoke without raising his voice. Too much volume would shatter the uneasy calm, but every word carried the weight of unspoken authority. "Ma'am," he said, extending the badge toward her, "you'll need to come with us to resolve this incident." She inclined her head with quiet dignity, her posture unshaken, as if bowing to a ritual she understood all too well. Her hand didn't tremble as she reached again for the hidden pocket in her silk dress. Instead of resistance, she offered consent in the subtlest of gestures, a nod measured and precise. The younger officer, lanky and uncertain, hovered nearby, eyes darting from her face to his partner's. Neither dared speak. Their authority felt paper-thin against her composed stillness. Onlookers pressed back, forming a widening circle of silent witnesses. Stallkeepers froze mid-sale, their voices swallowed by the growing tension. A man carrying a stack of woven baskets stopped, breathing altogether, his arms locked in place. Mothers gently hushed their children, marveling at the scene unfolding as though it were theater rather than reality. This was no routine stop. The uniform's invisible power sought out a compliant subject to bend under its weight. She extended her hand calmly, allowing the taller officer to take hold of her wrist. The cool click of the escort cuffs echoed faintly, more a punctuation than a proclamation. Her gaze remained leveled, unfazed, as she stepped away from the stalls and into the patrol car's open door. The crowd exhaled collectively. Their silence transformed into a shared reckoning. When an ordinary woman becomes the stage for power's demands, refusal is the bravest rebellion of all. She paused at the open door, head turning once to face the gathered onlookers. In their eyes flickered a painful uncertainty, as if everyone sensed they'd witnessed something they weren't meant to see. Not a single person stepped forward. Instead, they melted back into patchy shade, hands tightening on market wares, faces turning away. The officer guided her inside his grip, firm but careful, as though handling fragile glass. With a click, the door slammed shut behind her, cutting off the last slice of daylight. For a heartbeat, the market held its breath. Then life resumed. Vendors shouted prices. Children ran between stalls. The aroma of roasting coffee drifted on the breeze. But through the darkened window, her figure remained upright, unbowed, framed by the sleek curve of the patrol car. No cry of protest, no frantic struggle, just the soft gleam of her silk dress fading into shadow. That silent silhouette would linger far longer in people's minds than any shouted command or flashing badge ever could. Just days later, a grainy clip surfaced online and spread like wildfire, the vendor's taunt. "What are you hiding under that silk dress?" followed by the officer's gloved fingers, brushing the hem, a droplet of water splashing against the pale fabric, and then the woman's unbroken, unwavering silence. Viewers watched on hearts pounding as the sequence played on loop, taunt intrusion's small wet stain, in stillness as resolute as steel. There was no soundtrack, only the soft rasp of fabric and the distant hum of market chatter. As the video reached tens of thousands of feeds, outrage ignited. Comment threads exploded with disbelief not merely at the officer's conduct, but at the stunned hush that enveloped every witness in the frame. "Why didn't anyone step in?" demanded one commenter. "Their silence is louder than his hands," wrote another. People argued that the real crime was the community's collective failure to speak up, to intervene to defend basic dignity. Memes contrasted the single woman's quiet strength against the crowd's frozen indifference. Hashtags like silence is complicity trended within hours. News outlets ran segments dissecting not only the legality of the officer's actions, but the moral vacuum left by those who stood by. Panel discussions featured experts who lamented how a culture of deference to uniform had overridden human decency. Retired seniors in online forums, people who'd grown up believing respect for authority was sacrosanct, typed painful confessions they would have looked away too. And yet that admission only fueled the conversation further. In town, shopkeepers peeked from behind shutters, recalling the day they watched the scene unfold. Some confessed they just didn't know what to do, while others pledged to speak out next time. The clip's true power lay not in exposing a single act of harassment, but in revealing the deeper indictment of communal silence. Across the country, strangers agreed if we remain silent, we become complicit. And few things are more condemnable than a crowd that watches injustice without lifting a voice. It was barely dawn when an unmarked sedan slid to a stop at the market entrance. A plainclothes man emerged, badge glinting in the pale light. Internal Affairs, U.S. Department of Justice. Stall workers, bleary-eyed from early shifts, froze mid-reach. The officer who'd brushed the silk hem went rigid, confusion cracking his swagger. His partner cast a tense glance as if reality itself had shifted beneath their feet. Instantly, the hush shattered. The woman in green silk advanced, hands steady and unhurried. She lifted her skirt just enough to reveal her own credentials, a DOJ investigator's ID, its embossed seal stark against flowing fabric. The crowd exhaled in collective shock. She was no hapless victim, but an undercover agent baiting a trap for those who abuse authority. Local commanders scrambled, crisp protocols dissolving into whispered panic. They had no script for a federal sting. Onlookers pressed closer, recalling how they'd stood silent yesterday. Now they found themselves unwilling extras in an unfolding drama caught between relief and shame. The federal inspector clicked open his leather case, producing a dossier heavy with recorded testimonies, dash cam footage, and internal memos marked for immediate subpoena. He spoke with calm authority. "Preserve all evidence. Remain in place until review teams arrive. We'll conduct interviews, review every surveillance feed. No tampered log goes unchecked." Under faded tarps, the market felt transformed. The uniform power that once threatened to subdue a single woman now stood exposed. Overhead, the dawn sky held its quiet promise, but below, authority's veneer had cracked, revealing raw machinery ensnared in its own net. In that place, once a tableau of everyday life, the true weight of silence had finally been lifted. Old case files tumbled out of locked drawers like buried bones, each report marked insufficient evidence or quietly excised from the public record. As investigators dug deeper, a pattern emerged, complaints dismissed for reasons more absurd than criminal phrases like non-standard behavior, an unverified claim slapped on what was plainly assault. Files stamped closed were reopened, revealing years' worth of officers treating ordinary men and women like unwitting actors in a private show, patting jackets, lifting hems, insisting on compliance as if it were sport. The deeper the review went, the grimmer the ledger names of veterans, teachers, retirees, all caught in the same web of entitlement. Marginal notes exposed an internal culture that rewarded proactive security checks and punished any hint of resistance. Once revered badges now shimmered with shame, and the very uniforms meant to protect the public were laid bare as instruments of unchecked authority. In the hush of the archive room, power's true toll at last came into stark relief. The final phase of scrutiny stretched over months. Dozens of officers were disciplined, and new laws were enacted to shield every citizen from any form of physical overreach. The old market still thrummed to life each weekend beneath its faded canopies, vendors calling out neighbors bartering over baskets of fruit and jars of jam. Yet something had shifted. Laughter no longer bubbled freely, and even a casual grin carried the weight of what had happened. No one dared to smirk as before, nor did anyone slip into silence. Eyes met with sober understanding. They had witnessed power misused, and now they bore the responsibility to speak up. The woman in the green silk dress became an unspoken legend, a reminder that security checks demand respect, not compliance. Amid the hum of normal trade, a vigilant calm took hold. Justice had woven itself into the market's daily rhythm. Stalls brimmed with fresh produce and handcrafted wares, but more importantly, they brimmed with renewed respect for every person passing through. Silence was no longer sanctuary, it was complicity, and this town had finally moved on. A full 12 months have passed since that afternoon in the market, yet the memory still shimmers in the late daylight. Now the weekend stalls stand under new banners. Respect is non-negotiable. Federal inspectors drop by unannounced, badges clipped inside their jackets, reminding everyone that physical boundaries are no longer optional. The old fruit vendor's stand, once the scene of that offhand question, has been replaced by a small kiosk offering free flyers on citizens' rights. Nearby, a glazed bronze plaque bears 4 quiet words: "Never pretend you didn't see." The market's hum feels different now. Vendors greet each other by name, not by price. Strangers linger long enough to share a nod or a question rather than slipping past in silence. Children weave between legs, unafraid of lingering hands, because the whole community has learned to speak up. A rotating team of compliance officers, civilian volunteers trained at the community center, walks the aisles not to police, but to listen and to intervene if any gesture oversteps. Last Sunday, as the sun sank crimson, the woman in the olive green dress reappeared. No fanfare, no cameras, just a steady figure moving through the crowd, pausing to inspect the stall selling hand-dyed scarves. She gently patted the hem of each fabric, as if affirming each vendor's dignity. Whispers followed her path, but this time they were words of gratitude, not curiosity. An elderly man at the edge of the lane raised his hat, a quiet salute to the silent force that had reshaped them all. Power in uniform still holds its weight, but now it's balanced by a community that refuses to be silenced. 1 year on Maplewood's market tells a different story, one of vigilance, voice, and the hard-won promise that no one will ever be touched or dismissed as if they didn't matter. Through this story, we witness the power of silent courage and an even greater power when a community speaks up to protect one another. The message to readers: don't wait for authority to grant you permission to speak, because your own voice is what drives change. Now we invite you to share your personal perspective. How do you think that single act in the silk dress sparked a nonviolent movement? And when do you predict racism will be completely eradicated? Will it be by 2040, 2050? Or will the fight continue indefinitely? Please comment below with your thoughts, because it is the diversity of voices that will build a future free from discrimination.